Well, hello, and welcome to the MilVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson, Tim Shaw, and Beau Higgins. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. But most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that all veterans deserve a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, you can earn, and you can build a world class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. My primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode. Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of the MilVet Podcast. I am your host, Beau Higgins. I have the pleasure today to be joined by Sean Bielat, who will talk about his time in the military and his transition and what he's doing today. For those that may not be familiar with the MilVet and what we do, the MilVet basically is an executive platform for veterans that are interested in getting into the private equity, venture capital, founder space. We can help you with those kind of roles in that transition. We also provide podcasts, we have a newsletter, we have a lot of information for veterans that may be interested in getting into this space. So definitely go check out themilvet.org to learn more about what we do and check out our podcast. But today we're here to talk with Sean and talk about his career and his transition. Sean, great to have you on the show and give us a little bit about what you're doing these days.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. This is great. So I currently live in Madrid, where I am launching a venture fund focused on European defense technology, with a particular focus on states bordering Russia. So the Nordics, the Baltics, Poland, Ukraine. There's a lot going on there right now. The security component of it is near and dear to my heart. I think it's important to their security, but I think it's also important to U.S. national security. So that's what I'm currently working on.
All right. Well, I can't wait to talk about the journey of how you got to this point. 'Cause I know you've had a lot of different stops on the way, and no path is linear. Let's bring it all the way back to kind of how you started. Obviously, a fellow Marine, and curious, what was your inspiration to even get into the Marine Corps back in the day? I know you're also a great product of Jesuit High School, as I was, and curious how the military get on your radar in the first place to even begin this journey.
Yeah, so both my grandfather served in World War II in the Army and the Army Air Corps. My dad and all three uncles served during the Vietnam era, and then, so I was kind of brought up with those as role models. My brother went to the Naval Academy, went into subs. I went in the Marine Corps. I was the first Marine in the family, so there's some new ground there. But yeah, I mean, I was always raised with my grandfather was kicked out of school in eighth grade during the Depression to go and support his family. They told him he had to go to work. He volunteered, after Pearl Harbor, and he did a little bit better. He still, when he came back from the war, worked in a shovel factory for 20 years and then retired. But he did a little bit better than his family prior to that, who had come over from Poland. Then my dad, thanks to the GI Bill after his service, was able to go to college, so he did a little bit better. And then he said, Sean, if you ever want to go in the military, make sure you go in as an officer, which, that was just his experience, but that put it in my head to go that route. And as a result, I did a little bit better. It opened up new opportunities for me. So for each generation of my family, military service has been, part of how we developed character and professionally, but also, part of the ladder of, the American dream. It sounds a little cheesy, but it's true.
No, I love that, and there's such. I've talked to several guests on the podcast that are immigrants or came from immigrant families, and that whole ability and opportunity in the United States to your point, one generation is a little bit better than the next generation, and the next generation, and the fact that the military does provide that for anyone out there, I think that doesn't know where to go or feels like maybe the playing field isn't equal. I mean, the military is the ultimate equalizer as far as your ability, your effort you put into it. Doesn't matter your background, your race, your creed, your gender. I mean, you can have a successful transition or have a successful career in the military and truly set up the next generation of your family for success. So there's something about that, and the story that you told that resonates, from your grandfather to your father to yourself, and then I'm sure on to the next generation. It's just it's an amazing story that is repeated over and over. And again, I'm not surprised by that, the motivation of why it all started. But I think it's a great story, and it's one worth telling. Although it may sound a little cheesy, but it's the real deal, man. It works, and
That's
it
right.
happens all the time. So that's fantastic. That's
Totally
fantastic.
agree. Yep.
And what
And
was the? Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, like you said, most meritocratic institution I've ever worked in,
Yeah.
most diverse institution I've ever worked in, I mean, you get ahead based on your performance and who you are, not where you came from, and it's pretty cool. You don't find that many places.
You definitely do not. It is the meritocracy piece of it is I think it stands out for sure that everyone gets the opportunity. No doubt about
Yeah.
that. No doubt about that. Well, and why did you pick the Marine Corps? I mean, I love it that you did as a fellow Marine, but what was the motivation there? Was it like to stick it in your brother a little bit?
It was the challenge. It was
Yeah.
special forces are one thing, and that's certainly a proving ground, and you certainly go, very far along that line in terms of proving yourself and putting yourself through challenge. But absent that, if you're looking at the forces in general, like, I know this is a diverse listening audience out there, but in my view, the Marine Corps is, kind of the most the you have to prove yourself. It's a difficult process to earn the right to call yourself a Marine, and it's a difficult journey to maintain that right. And so for me, that was very alluring.
That's awesome. Well, talk about. I mean, any highlights of your time in the Marine Corps? I know you had a long career. Give us a few of the highlights of your time in, and maybe some of the things that you took away from the military during your time in that have been kind of set the foundation for your success in the future.
Yeah, sure. So I spent 4 years on active duty and then 16 years in the reserve, some of which was in the IRR. So, I never deployed. I never, so many guys, so many women I know since two, 2001 went and did things in Iraq and Afghanistan. I never had that opportunity, but it was still, anybody who has served, anybody who's been part of that 1 or 2% of Americans who wears the uniform, I think has a right to be proud of their service. I certainly am. For me, the highlight was I got the additional MOS of 1803, which is Amphibious Assault Vehicle Officer, which was what I wanted coming out of TBS. Didn't work out that way, but I at least got to play with some AAVs and have a good time doing that. In the reserve, I did Intel. I was an Intel officer, which I enjoyed a lot. So definitely interesting. And I'm going to skip ahead slightly here, and then we can come back, but during 2006 to 2008, I was working on the counter IED fight in my civilian job. But simultaneously on the weekends, I was, at the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, in the Marine Corps Crisis Operations Cell, watching all the reporting come in of Marines getting hit by IEDs and seeing what it was like from that side of things. So being able to connect those two pieces for me was a very important part of my civilian and my military career.
No, I love that, and we'll talk about that more for sure. One note about Amtrak: you see, they just retired the last AAV. The new ones are out there, so you got in there under the wire, I
Yeah,
guess,
that's right.
before they
That's right.
put them into mothballs, I guess. But I think it's interesting that what you said. Obviously, doing that much time in the reserves, where you have an eye on the present conflict and you're in it on the weekends, but you also obviously are a civilian by day, if you will, and being able to take maybe what you're seeing, I would assume, from your reserve job, and maybe then figure out, okay, there's something here that I can do to make a difference to help the guys that I'm working at my part-time job, right? I mean, is that where that part of what you did is kind of you saw an opportunity based on the need for the Marines or for the military? And is that part of what your transition was? I'm curious. It sounds like it might have been something that was okay. I'm in the control center. I see these guys getting blown up. There's got to be a better way. I can fix that on my real job or our day job, if you will. So it's kind of interesting how those obviously blended in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so that's right. It happened a little bit differently. So I'll just kind of walk you through chronologically. So after I left active service, I went to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and did a Master in Public Policy focused in international security. And it was a strange time for me because I started in 2002, and of course the Iraq invasion happened. during my first year there. And so I was in grad school, and everybody's having these academic debates about, like, whether we should go and what it should mean. And I'm just sitting there knowing that all my friends are going, my former Marines are going, and I'm not, And so I had, definitely some mixed feelings about that. And so coming out of grad school, I did a summer associateship at McKinsey, and then ended up going there after grad school, primarily to learn. It's a great opportunity to gain just practical knowledge about a bunch of businesses in a short period of time. As well as, at the time, the compensation was certainly attractive coming out of the military. It's a step up, and so it was a great opportunity, but it wasn't for me. The consulting lifestyle is I shouldn't say lifestyle. The consulting business, for me, I missed the ability to make decisions versus, tell people, here's a PowerPoint and hopefully you do this, and then you leave the business and who knows what happens. So for me, it wasn't a great fit. And culturally, I like McKinsey, a lot of smart people, a lot of good people there, but it's a very culturally different institution than the Marine Corps. And so coming out of McKinsey, I wanted something again that felt more mission driven and felt like there was some more connection to my previous service in the Marines. And so I found iRobot, which, at the time, robotics. This was 2006. People were talking a lot about robots, and these guys were making the Roomba vacuum cleaner,
Yeah.
which was a relatively new product at the time. But they also had a defense business, and so the defense business was doing the counter IED robots. And so when I learned that, and I saw, at first I kind of applied as a lark, this is funny, robot company and whatever.
Yeah.
But then when I saw what they were actually doing, and I saw the connection to the reserve side of things, and what was going on in Iraq, and at the time a little lesser degree Afghanistan, and I was able to get in as director of business development and do strategy and BD, and think about new applications for the robots, how we could design and develop and incorporate features that would be relevant to the warfighter. They had a lot of very talented roboticists and engineers. They didn't have as many folks who were directly connected to the service. And so, it's a different perspective. And so
Yeah.
what good engineers like to do is solve hard problems, and they'll solve those problems all day long. And sometimes that'll go off the path of what's most necessary or to the end user.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, that was part of the fun and part of the challenge there. And I shifted from that role into running. They called it a program manager, but running one of the PackBot, which at the time was the biggest iRobot, counter ID robot. And so I had about 120 people in the program. It was 100 million ish in revenue. So it was kind of my company command.
Yeah.
It was a big responsibility, and I was able to get a lot done, and learned a lot in that role. And so I was there for about 3 years at iRobot, and in late 2009, left to run for Congress because I saw another way to serve.
Yeah. We'll get there in a second. And I'm
Okay.
curious, because of what your path to get there, and particularly, I had Nate Fick on the show
Oh
a
yeah.
few weeks ago, and he went through the public policy program at Harvard as well. I
Mhm.
think with an MBA part of it too. Did you? There's a way you I think he did both, right? Did you do that piece? I'm curious because like you obviously went a public policy thing, you did a business pivot. So did you do that piece of it, or did you feel like you needed that business school piece to be successful? I'm just curious how your post Marine Corps education then applied to what you were doing from there.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think probably relevant to the thought process I was going through is probably relevant to the people who are watching this. So for me, it was kind of interest that drew me to the public policy program. I found it fascinating. It was super interesting. I was going to do a joint law degree, and then chose not to do the law component because I figured McKinsey was a better path for me. But one of the things that I realized was that people didn't really know how to interpret the Master in Public Policy. So they didn't really know what they knew what McKinsey meant, but they didn't know what to make of the MPP. And so as I realized I was going down that business path, and as I started thinking about what I wanted to do in the future, I decided to do an MBA, and so I did it at Wharton through their Wharton Executive MBA program. And so the WEMBA, as they call it, is the exact same curriculum as the full time program. You just and you do it in 2 years, but you do it over the summer as well. So you have the exact same number of course hours, same credits, all that stuff. And it was a pain in the neck. It was a drag. But I had fun, but it was like a lot of work, you know. And so maybe in retrospect, I would have just done an MBA instead of an MPP. So the MPP was loved it. Met my wife there, so no regrets.
Yep.
But in terms of what it prepared me for, the MBA might have been a little bit more relevant for me.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And again, I think with Nate's program, he did both of them combined at Harvard. They had an
Right.
MPP with the
I
MBA at
wish
the
I
same
yeah,
time.
that would have been the smart
Yeah,
way to do it.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, everything's easier in retrospect,
that's
obviously. But
right.
but I think it's a great McKinsey's a brand name, and a lot of the folks that we work with at the MilVet have had time there. And again, I think it's not good or bad, or you can learn a lot from there. And obviously, it
For
was just
sure.
one of those tools in your toolbox that helped you be successful later on. But and I will just kind of focus on your transition in general. I mean, what did you find that you brought to a McKinsey, or really even to an iRobot, if you move forward, that you brought from the military? And again, I think it's pretty easy in the iRobot piece because you had the warfighter perspective and they were the engineers, right? You were able to look at that in the big picture, kind of bring that together. Do you feel like you brought that same thing to a McKinsey, or what was it that you brought from the military that did help you be successful in both those roles in general, or in general, is there a thing or two that you would highlight?
Yeah, obviously the military teaches you a lot about teamwork and how to support your teammates, and also kind of personal discipline and work ethic and that sort of thing. But I was very much in learning mode at McKinsey. I was very much absorbing what was going on. I hadn't come from an MBA program, so I had a lot of catching up to do in terms of just kind of general business thinking and strategy and that sort of thing. I think it gave me confidence in dealing with kind of some senior clients, but I definitely I personally was at a knowledge deficit, and so for me, it was much more about what I took away than what I gave. Just by virtue of the fact that I had a lot to learn. At iRobot, I think I came to the table with a little bit more, just because it was on topics I was familiar with. I was able to bring a perspective that wasn't as common. I mean, there were some veterans there, but they were definitely not all in. They weren't driving the show for the
Yeah,
most part.
got it. It's interesting. I've talked to several folks that did pivot, into whether it's a McKinsey or onto like Wall Street, the Goldmans of the world. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, I definitely, I'm almost, I'd say most of them when they first got there, at least for a year or two, felt a little bit like overwhelmed by it. But they all kind of said, you know what, I did Windows, man. I did whatever needed to be done. I showed up early, I stayed late, I
yeah,
got lunch. I picked up with a dry clean, whatever had to be done, all the stuff that no one else wanted to do. I did all that, and that earned, kind of got you be able to be kind of at least be part of discussions and made yourself valuable wherever you can find it. I think is one of those things that you may not be, again, the smartest guy from a book standpoint, but that work ethic, that ability and willingness to do whatever it takes wherever you can help and be that utility infielder is something that I think applies to the military and maybe isn't something that everyone else brings to the table. That's not the military. I don't know. I don't know if you're obsessed or not, but yeah,
totally agree. Totally agree. And I really enjoyed working with. There are a lot of veterans at McKinsey. A lot of people get out, go do their MBA, end up at McKinsey, and so I really enjoyed a lot of the veterans I worked with because there was sort of um, an underlying understanding of what it meant to work in a certain way and how to commit to a project. And and like I said, there were a lot of good people there, so but I definitely found that the veterans brought to the table something that was a little bit different than some of our other colleagues.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Well, let's move forward again. The iRobot piece is awesome, and again, I think that's a great. It seemed like it was an opportune place for you to be to utilize your skill set. Obviously, with what you were doing in the reserves, where you were watching the fight day to day, having been in the military, being able just to talk operator language is probably something alone to translate. From operator to engineer, and not need to be this thing that's super complicated. It's like, hey, I just need something. I don't need the perfect thing. I need something. I mean, that's a lot of the
Right.
engineer
Yeah.
talk that you're able to bring to that. And again, and obviously they recognize that there and gave you, increasing responsibility. And how did that go? How did that play out for you at iRobot? And what was kind of how long did that last for you? And what did you take away from that? Yeah,
Yeah, no, it was great, great learning experience. It was the first time I had anything resembling a P&L to think through and contribute to the value of the company. iRobot was small, but it was a publicly traded company,
yeah,
and so quarterly results mattered, and increasing profitability mattered, and the operational issues, reducing cogs, thinking about designing for manufacture, thinking about how the manufacturing occur. There's a lot of learning, but it was much more operational than McKinsey, which was, at least the things I was working on, felt a little more academic to me, or a little bit more, kind of, we're going to do some analysis and analyze the analysis and do
right,
some
right, and
analysis.
reanalyze it, and then
Yeah,
repackage it and sell it to somebody else.
yeah.
Like,
And then I'll spend hours at night aligning, squares on PowerPoint and stuff like
yeah,
this. Whereas at iRobot, for me, it was, I really enjoyed the operational aspects of it, and figuring out how to take ideas and turn them into something that was actionable and then ultimately profitable.
yeah, no, that's awesome. And building a real thing that can be that you're and helping Marines or helping soldiers in reality. There's just a more direct line to a give back factor, I think,
That's
right?
right.
And that's what I think all of us are looking for that in some way, shape, or form. When we leave the military, we don't know we're going to miss it, but you do miss it in some way, shape, or form. And obviously, you missed it so much you decided to run for office. So tell us about that. That's a pretty speaking of public policy. That's a pretty big pivot to make that jump. What was that all about, and how'd that come down?
Well, so at the time, my congressman had been in there for almost 30 years, and I wasn't particularly impressed by what was going on in DC, and I saw him as part of the problem, and his opponent, the it was somebody who was, on paper, very unsuited for office. I mean, just people didn't take him very seriously, and so I decided to get into the race, but I had no political knowledge or connections or anything. And so, I said to my wife, "Hey, I want to run for Congress," and she said, "Great, talk to 50 people and get back to me." And I said, "Well, I don't know 50 people." So we negotiated down, and finally she's like, "Talk to 5 people." I'm like, "Okay." So I Googled, head of the party in this place, head of the party in that, and I cold emailed them, and each person, as long as they thought I was credible, introduced me to the next person, and pretty soon it snowballed, and we had a real campaign with national interest and national attention, and raised a lot of money, and it was a pretty competitive race. And so, again, learned a lot of things, from very different things than what I would learn at iRobot, but definitely skills that I was able to take forward. And again, jumping ahead just for one moment, what I'm doing now in terms of venture capital feels very analogous to what I did when I ran for office, in terms of how you build the relationships, how you build the network, how you go from a couple of people out to many, and how much credibility matters, and how you tell your story matters.
No, I love that, and I definitely want to dig into that a good bit. I mean, I think it seems like a pretty radical pivot to go from the corporate America world of an iRobot and building drones that are finding IDs to go in to run for office. I mean, great. And again, I had Dick Leinenkugel on the show previously, and he's a guy that ran for office and had a similar like just kind of decide I want to get back again and find a different way to do that, and learned didn't win but learned a lot from it and took that
Yep.
forward. But obviously, I think all of us you learn from every experience you go through. In that experience, though I'm sure difficult at times, and you're like, and your wife probably thought you were crazy, but you learned a ton from it, and you wouldn't be where you are today if you hadn't made that
That's right.
leap into the unknown. I think, and I think that's one of the things I've also taken away from, and making also a connection to the private equity venture capital space. For those founders out there, for those guys with the ideas, you have to be willing to like bet on yourself and just jump, right? And
That's right.
where more are you doing that if you're running for office? Like you are betting on yourself. Your name, you're it. It's not like you have a team. Like you have a team, but like they're voting for you, not your team. Like so, there's nothing more, putting yourself out there than running for office. So I think good, bad, ugly of all the political piece of it, I think taking that and having that ability to make that leap into public office or run public office maybe is a factor in making being able to be comfortable with things that are uncomfortable, and obviously maybe pivot into what you did after that. This kind of makes it to me a logical, just from a how you the thought process of it all kind of goes hand in hand. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, it was an entrepreneurial journey. It was an
Yeah,
entrepreneurial in the sense of starting a company, but it sort of was. I mean, it was like
yeah.
building an organization from scratch, convincing not investors but voters, and doing all the things that you have to do. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of it was an all in sort of effort. It wasn't a 9 to 5 by any stretch.
And I assume again, yeah, if you're trying to raise capital for your company, you're talking to investors, or you're talking to donors on the other side. You're
That's
making a
right.
pitch to them, and a lot of times they're saying no, probably. So it's a
Yeah,
little school.
exactly.
Like I got to raise money, and hope they believe in me because I'm sure
Yeah,
I'll knock on a lot of doors and not all of them get answered. But well,
that's right.
let's talk about then. So how that what what next? Then once that kind of process went through, and what did you decide? Would you take some time off and kind of figure it out, or what was the thought processes of that next transition to get back into or kind of start the PE world for you?
Yeah, so I happened into an opportunity through the McKinsey Alumni Network to run an online startup that a couple of guys had gotten off the ground, focused on political advocacy. And at that time, I had a 1 year old and a 2 year old, and it was I was able to work from home way before COVID, so that was a nice thing, and I was excited about starting down the entrepreneurial journey. The company is still going, but it wasn't going to flourish under me. And it wasn't, it was a good ride. It was, yeah, I liked the guys I was working with, but not everything's a home run, right? Like sometimes you, that's part of entrepreneurship too, right? Some things work better than other things, and so I learned some from that as well. And it was actually, had that gone a little better, then I could have been stuck there for a while, if that
Yeah,
makes sense, right?
yeah.
Like if it was just a little bit better, I probably would have been satisfied. But because I wasn't satisfied, it led to the next opportunity. And if you have anything else you want to ask about that stage, I'm happy to answer it. But that is probably um, probably it wasn't a highlight. It wasn't a low light, but it wasn't a highlight relative to some of the other things I've done in my career.
Well, I mean, I think again, you learn from every step of the journey, and I think I say this all the time. You learn more from failure than you do from success, and not maybe it's not a failure per se, but
Right.
the negative, the challenge, the thing that didn't go as planned, you actually learn more from. If you're always successful, it's like it just comes too easy. You don't really learn from that. You learn from the
That's right.
hardships, and you learn through like, man, this is. I didn't, for whatever reason, it wasn't. I think that's the takeaway is that not everything's going to be successful. You have to have the grit to push through it and take away the positives from the negatives, right? There's always going to be good you learn from those things, even if they don't turn out as you had hoped. But take the good from that and then pivot to something else, and you use what you learned in that process to take the next step, which you obviously did in some way, shape, or form. So, yeah, what was next? Yeah,
So in 2014, I approached iRobot with an offer to buy the defense business. They were interested, so I went and found a private equity sponsor, and together we bought the business. We closed the deal in 2016. I ran it for 3 years, and then in 2019 sold it. So I'll pause there because I know that's a short way to tell the story, and I'm sure you have better questions.
No, no. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, just to go back to what you knew in some ways, you obviously were familiar with that. You saw where they were. You saw an opportunity and invested in it. And I mean, did you feel like you had, I say, the experience? I mean, I know you obviously knew the company better than most, or you knew all the hidden secrets of it. I mean, you've been gone for a little bit, but you knew enough where you felt like you could get back in there and turn it around into something. But it I guess what was the hardest part about it for you coming in from the PEC side, vice just the straight corporate America side? What was the difference in maybe running it, and I guess because there are two different types of companies who they answer to, what they do. The funding piece of it always is the usually the biggest challenge when I talk to guys that are investing in this is how'd you get the capital? What did you learn from that experience, and what was different than your first run when you were with iRobot?
Yeah, learned so much. So first of all, when I when I approached iRobot with an offer, I had no capital to back the offer. Uh, I had to go and network my way into talking to a bunch of private equity firms until I found a few that were interested, and then I was able to negotiate, with one in particular that I thought would be a great partner. But the whole time, I was sort of wondering if they would believe me. If they would say, "Okay, this is a great deal. Now we'll go with somebody who actually knows what they're talking about to run the
Yeah,
business."
yeah.
And I was very fortunate that they did believe in me, and so I came in as CEO. And it was interesting because when we carved out the business, I was the only new employee. I came in as CEO. The rest of the employees were already there. I had known probably 20% of them from several years prior, but most of the company, the new company, were new to me and I was new to them. And so it was sort of like, when you're first commissioned and or you come into a command and you have to, you have the credibility because you have the rank, but at the same time you have to prove that you deserve the respect, right?
Sure.
And so you have to listen to people and you have to understand what you need to know and what you can rely on others to know. And so that was really a chance for me to implement some of the things I learned as an officer in terms of, trusting the leadership beneath you to guide you, and knowing that, for me, it's like 90 to 95% of the time, I'm just going to say, yep, that makes sense to the people below me. And the other like 5 or 10% is what I get paid for. It's
Yep.
the times where I'm going to say, no, that's not what we're doing. And it's on me if it fails, and it's their success if it succeeds. And so I saw myself as CEO as having the role of the outward communication, so with the board, with the investors, with potential acquirers, with media, and then setting strategy and then overseeing everybody's implementation of the strategy, right? So I stepped back day to day and said, "Hey guys, I trust you. I'm going to check on what you're doing, but I'm not going to micromanage it." And I was very fortunate to have a great team there. We were able to bring in a couple other people who were also very additive, and getting the people right is like 98% of what it takes to be successful as a CEO, I think. And so I was very fortunate to have a great team and to build a great team. And you know, I always said we had four goals. Three were strategic around programs of record that we were pursuing. The fourth was build a great company, and that had like a couple of subcomponents. But one of the things I talked about every Thursday, we'd have a company get together. We'd have beers. We'd talk about everything that was going on in the company and stuff. And one of the things I would always stress was like, I wanted this to be a period of everybody at the company's career that they would look back at and be proud of. Everybody goes a million different directions, but I wanted everybody to be able to say, "Hey, man, those couple of years that I at Endeavor were like awesome," and I really thrived and I did great work. And I've talked to a bunch of people and they've said that, and so that's really meant a lot to me, to have people have that as that sense of teamwork and that sense of ownership and that sense of pride and what they were doing and the mission of it meant something to them, which for me is like a huge win in and of itself. So it was a great experience. I learned a ton. We had a very nice, we were able to sell the business for about 15 times what we paid for it
No,
in 3 years, which, was a great outcome. And so, yeah, it was a great experience.
that's awesome. No, I love the fact that you were able to come in and build that culture. I mean, it's so much about the culture, and to your point too about the hires. I mean, certainly from the MilVet, that's what we do. We try to provide those type of people to companies that will be additive, will be part of that team, and will be come in and give it the uplift that a veteran can do. And I think your point of you know you're doing you're talking to the board, you're blocking and tackling out there to allow the team to do their job, right? Your
That's right.
job is to clear away the noise so nothing else bothers them, and you'll take on that. Again, you're the pulling guard so they can score a touchdown, right?
Yeah.
If you have that attitude and mindset, I think that goes a long way, and the team appreciates that. You're more worried about their success than, not that you're not worried about your success, but you're trying to clear all that out of the way so they can be successful, which then makes the company successful. Which is, again, I think
Right.
what we bring, or that servant leadership piece from the military, is a huge part of that, which is great. And in
Yep.
3 years to turn around that question, that's that's atypical from the guys I've talked to. That's pretty quick, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and do not attribute it to my skill. There's anybody who's successful and doesn't tell you that luck is part of it is lying.
Yep.
I mean, you got to be smart, you got to be good, but you also have to be lucky. And
Yep, there's some of that,
there's
always,
yeah,
always. So, all right, so you have a great exit from that, and you renamed it to Endeavor. Is that what it was? The company,
Endeavor Robotics. That's
Endeavor
right.
Robots.
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
and then what's next? I mean, you thinking you want more tech? You obviously had something very successful, and what was the next thought? Did you take some time away after that? Did you take a knee, drink water, or did you go right to the next thing?
I did take some time away, which was intentional, and then COVID happened, and so then
Oh
it turned
yeah, yeah,
into more time away because everything was pretty funky for a couple of years in
sure,
terms of like what was happening, where the opportunities were, and stuff. And so through my personal network, through people I knew, got into private equity with a small firm in Boston as kind of a operating partner, as an executive partner, and so got involved on a couple of the Portco boards and was executive chairman of a couple of companies. And I really enjoyed that role, the executive chairman role. I'm still the executive chairman of one of the companies, because it allowed me to participate strategically and say, hey, have we thought about this? Are we doing that? At a very high level, and then rely on the CEO and the management team to actually run the company and steer the ship and do all the things that needed to be done. Um, and it was also the first time in my career where I had more of a portfolio approach to my career. So I was at one point on 6 or 7 boards, and it was like a couple hours here on this and a couple hours there on that. And I found myself also doing a lot of advising, so a lot of give back, right? Like, I hopefully have learned a couple of things now, and can pass on some things to people who are at earlier stages or struggling through something. And so I ended up advising a lot of defense and dual use tech startups. Just given the defense robotics piece, it was sort of a natural fit.
yeah,
And so I was doing the private equity work, doing the advising, and started a startup focused in clean energy. I mean, I think that energy is, given the huge increase in demand that's going on, because of AI, because of electric vehicles, because of the proliferation of devices that we all carry, and the very limited new supply that's coming online. I think there's a ton of opportunity right now in energy, whether it's green or traditional sources. I think there's all sorts of opportunity. So, had a startup doing that. With the change of administration and the change of the landscape in terms of regulation and incentives and everything else, the opportunity kind of fell away. And so I said, I've been doing this. So again, you learn from your failures, right?
yeah, yeah.
I had what I thought was a super great idea. I still think it's a pretty good idea.
Time
And
matters,
just
though, right? I mean, yeah,
yeah,
there's other
time
factors.
matters.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And And so, I said, okay, let me return more to my roots. What do I know about? What am I already doing? And I said, on the one hand, I'm doing some investing from a private equity perspective. And on the other hand, I'm doing this advising to defense tech. I know defense tech. I'm in Europe. Europe has a couple of interesting things going on right now. There's from 2022. Recently, obviously, the administration has been pushing for NATO to step up in terms of its spending, and we've seen pretty substantial increases in commitments. But even prior to that, from 2022, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, the full scale invasion, to 2024, defense spending in the border states, bordering Russia, was up 58%.
Wow.
During that same period, U.S. defense spending was up 8%.
Hmm.
Across Europe, it was up 38%. So huge increases in spending in Europe. And now it's a smaller pool than the U.S., but
Sure, sure,
big.
sure.
So that creates an interesting dynamic. You have lower valuations there, because there's less venture capital. It's a less mature scene. So that's interesting. And then for me, the mission piece. So mission is super important to me and like the
Yeah.
things that I've chosen to do. And so for me, the mission piece of helping, the border states stand up to a real threat. I mean, you go to Estonia, you go to Ukraine, you go to Poland, they're not kidding around. This is not theoretical. This is like something that could happen tomorrow. And so for me, the mission component of it was really compelling as well.
No, I love that. And again, it's I think it's an opportunity. Obviously, I mean, you've been around this space for a long time, and when you bring together just the, I mean, it's probably it's riskier, I would assume, right? Because there's just more unknowns, I think, than maybe investing in the U.S. market. At least to me, it seems riskier. To just, I'm sure there's a lot more. I have this vision in my head that everything in like Eastern Europe, like the mobs involved, or like it's just like a lot of more shady stuff going on. I don't know. That's by my head. You know, the market it doesn't seem as clean somehow as it is in America. But I think to your point, right? If you can figure it out, if you can bring capital, which money talks anywhere you are, right? The opportunities I'm sure are there. It's probably not the ecosystem is probably harder to find the opportunities. They're probably not doing like venture capital or like these colleges have these you know investor bowls or I'm guessing there's not a lot of that going on. Maybe there is, but I mean it's just a very different ecosystem. But
It's
if
very
you can
different.
figure it out, I mean it's probably more about your network of people even than in the states. I would think there you have to kind of know somebody to even have an opportunity. Is that fair to say? Because it just seems more. I mean, it's just different. Not good or bad. It's just a different market than it is in the U.S. market, right? And what are like the challenges you've had in trying to navigate the international market to find those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I could right now find a company probably in the next 20 minutes in California I could invest in,
Right.
right? And I would know the that it was a good company because these people knew it, and I could call them or email them, and pretty soon I'd Ukraine. If you want to invest in a company, you got to go there, and you gotta see the tech, and you got to talk to the people, and you got to understand. You got to talk to other people who know the market better than I do, and say, hey, are these guys legit? They seem legit, but are they somebody you would, so you're right. You have to be on the ground. You have to talk to people, a lot of people. There is a lot of interesting stuff going on because, the pace of the evolution of the technology is so rapid.
Yeah.
A drone goes up today, the next day the Russians figure out how to take it down. The next day, Ukrainians are putting up a new, I mean, it's just like by the month, changing. And
Yeah.
so it creates it's a very dynamic environment and it really matters. And so everybody's trying to find solutions. I mean, there is a unity of purpose and a unity of mission there that's amazing to see.
Hmm.
And, as an American, I think, wow, if we faced a similar threat, could we overcome, some of these political, the political dispersion that we see today, the fissure of our national, sense of cohesiveness. Could we overcome that in the same way that the Ukrainians have? And I hope the answer is yes, because I know historically we have. So I'd like to think that the answer is yes, but seeing it on the ground is really powerful. And it's, you go there and it's it's a positive attitude. Like
Yeah,
you would think people would be downtrodden and walking around with their heads down low. They're not. They're like, hey, we're going to win this thing. Yeah, we need more capital. Yeah, we need more bullets and bombs, but we're going to win this thing. And it's cool to see.
that is awesome. No, I love that. I love to hear that attitude, obviously, and I think you're right. I mean, I talk about a lot about September 12th and the feeling of unity this country had. I feel we could have
Yeah,
it. It doesn't. It doesn't. There are fleeting opportunities, but if we needed to, we certainly could. But I
yeah,
mean, I think it's great to hear that September 12th feeling has been going on for 3 years now, or just a
yeah,
long, and they've been able to maintain that and try to figure it out, in a place where, again, navigating the roadblocks to entry are steeper for external capital, just because
yeah,
it's not a direct path. To your point, you can't just go online and call a guy up and say, you could get 1,000 pitches today in San Francisco. Over there, it's a little more. It's you got to know the right guy. Well, I guess, as we kind of get toward the end of things here, I mean, what do you see as the future for you? What are you investing in? Where, if we talk in three years from now, where will you be? What are you doing? What is, where are you at now? And what's exciting you about the future?
yeah. I just talked about the sense of mission for me.
Yeah,
It's very powerful. I need to be doing something that I feel like matters, and you can find missions all over the place, right? Like one person's mission is going to be different than another. But for me, having the purpose, having something that I believe in, having something that I'm a greater cause that I'm trying to work for is really important. So right now, I'm very committed to this. Western democracy,
yeah,
this transatlantic security, because I don't see any way that Europe gets pulled into a war that the US is not also pulled into. So I feel very strongly that, European security is US security. It's just like if something were to happen in Taiwan, the US would respond. If something were to happen in Eastern Europe, like it or not, we'd get drawn into that. And so, if we can strengthen European deterrence, if we can strengthen NATO responsiveness aside from what the U.S. provides, if we can do these things, that's ultimately to the benefit of U.S. national security. So for me, that's really important. It's what I want to be working on for the next, I don't know, bunch of years. I think venture capital in this space is really exciting, and I also think there's an opportunity to bring a different kind of approach and mindset. So, you know, everybody likes to invest in companies that in home run companies, right? So you want to invest in the next Anduril or uh,
Palantir, right? Yeah,
yeah,
I get you.
Palantir, you name it, right? Like software driven AI, but there's a lot of, as anybody who's served knows, software doesn't win wars, right? At the end of the day, you need things that do stuff. You need hard tech, you need kinetics, you need operational capabilities, you need logistics, all that stuff. A lot of it's unsexy, and a lot of it aren't. A lot of these aren't going to be $10 billion IPOs. They're going to be like maybe $100 million in 10 years. To me, that's all right. Like, I don't have to hit a bunch of home runs. I got to get on base a lot of times and help a lot of companies and return capital to my investors. And there's different paths to doing that. And, I'm optimistic that if I can identify the right companies and then I can actually bring value to them aside from a check, that's a win. And that'll make me feel like I'm achieving my mission and helping my investors out. And, it's a win.
Sean, I love that. I love how you layer in, just the sense of purpose you get from giving back to your country in the bigger part. But have done, and your career path has been very interesting, from the Marine Corps into, traditional business, traditional, consulting with McKinsey, and to getting a taste of the PE venture capital space, running for office. I mean, it's a fantastic story. And again, I think everyone in this audience can learn something from what you've said, and the hills and valleys of your career, because we all have them.
For sure.
Everyone, no career transition is linear. They are all over the page, and yours is one of the most unique that I've heard in a long time. And as we get ready to wrap up, any kind of closing words or thoughts for the audience about, if you want to get into space these days, what would you do if you had to get where you are now? What were any words of wisdom that to anyone that is interested in doing defense tech in in Eastern Europe? Like, how do you get there from here?
Well, if you're interested in defense tech in Eastern Europe, give me a call. But if you're, in terms of like, as I think about transition, I think, coming out, what I would do the same or different. I think education makes a ton of sense. If you're getting out of the military to, particularly as a junior officer, go and find some education. I think what that education is changing. Like, I don't know that you need 2 years of an MBA and all the expense and opportunity cost, but I do think you need to learn. And so, like, I do a bunch of short courses. I didn't know enough about AI, so I did an online course on AI. Learned some stuff. It was a couple $1,000. Took me a month. Whatever. I think education matters a lot, but it can take a lot of different forms. I think I would have gone more quickly to an operational role, like I had at iRobot. Get hands-on, figure out how to run stuff in the private sector, figure out, how to make a P&L more successful. But I also think, like you said, things are nonlinear. Like, I would have never guessed I'd get into robotics. I would have never guessed I'd get into venture capital. It's like stuff just happens and life carries you a certain way. And as long as you're like thinking of, I try to have a 5-year plan, but beyond 5 years, you can't really even think about things. And to me, that 5-year plan is more like how I would like to feel in 5 years, like what the aspects of my life would be, versus like, I want to be, COO of this company in 5 years. For me, that's not useful. But saying in 5 years, I want to, be happy with my family and be living in this place and be in this position, that to me has been very, very helpful.
I love it. Hey, great advice to close out the program. Thank you for the time today, Sean. I can't wait to see what the future holds, what's next, and as you're hitting a bunch of singles, and hopefully some home runs out there too, man. But good luck to you.
Thank you.
But they're all good. They're all good, man. Appreciate the time. Appreciate having on the show, Sean. Great stuff.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. For more content, follow us on Instagram at TheMilitary or on LinkedIn. Join us at an upcoming event or learn more on our website, TheMilVet.org. Feel free to email us directly at leadership@TheMilVet.org. Thank you so much and take care.